The soul never dies, not even the darkest one. It remembers. It returns. Edgar Cayce. There are questions we whisper only in the dark. After the world quotes, after the headlines fade and the news scrolls to the next horror, the soul still wonders. What happens to the monsters? Not the ones in stories. The real ones. The men and women whose hands drip with history's blood. The dictators, the killers, the destroyers of nations. Hitler, Pol Pot. The madmen who made suffering a spectacle. Where do they go? When the body collapses, when no court is left to judge them. Edgar Cayce. The sleeping prophet answered with a calm that shook the silence. The soul cannot be extinguished. Not even theirs. There is no eternal fire waiting with pitchforks. No mythic torture chamber where screams echo for eternity. That Cayce said is too easy, too human. What awaits them is far worse and more sacred. Because in the realm beyond death there is no escape into justification or denial. The soul meets itself bare, ancient, and exact. No mask survives. No lie remains. And there begins the mirror. Not the mirror of vanity, but the mirror of reckoning. One in which you see not your face, but the faces of every life you ever touched. Not your triumphs, but their pain. The terror in the eyes of the child you hurt. The slow death in the man you betrayed. The despair of the woman whose life you shattered. And you don't just see it. You feel it. You relive it. Not as a punishment, but as an understanding. This, Cayce taught, is the soul's curriculum. A violent life births a violent afterlife, not imposed, but echoed. This is not judgment. This is balance. This is the beginning of karmic memory. But some refuse. Some souls bloated with pride still clench their teeth in death. They deny. They resist. And so they remain stuck between realms, between breaths, trapped in what Cayce called the plains of confusion. Not hell, but a fog, a torment of ego's echo, a place where time stops but suffering does not. They walk centuries long through a fog of their own making, refusing to surrender, unable to forget, hungry but never fed, seeking a door that only opens with truth. And yet this is not the end. Even the darkest souls, said Cayce, will one day return, not as tyrants, not as echoes of their past, but as what the soul needs to become. A child left behind, a wanderer without name, a silent presence in the crowd carrying grief as memory, not power. Hitler will return. Not with armies, but with silence. Not with power, but perhaps as a child rejected by all, or a nameless wanderer carrying the grief he once dealt like coins. This is not justice as we define it. It is the slow mathematics of the soul. Every act lived twice, once in doing, once in receiving. So if you've ever wondered where evil goes, it goes nowhere. It transforms, or it repeats. And it's repeating now. If something in this touched a memory you didn't know you carried, you're not alone. Subscribe to Edgar Cayce Predictions, not just for content, but for clarity. You thought you were breaking down. But what if your soul was breaking through? We don't often admit it, but the question of evil, real visceral evil, lives quietly in all of us. Not in the abstract, not in dusty books or late-night debates, but in the silent tremble of our own inner grief. Because when we hear stories of monsters, the Hitlers, the serial killers, the abusers who wear human faces, something ancient stirs, a deep ache, a cry for justice, and a deeper fear. What if nothing ever makes it right? What if some souls are too far gone? We've all seen it, felt it. Maybe not in history books, but in our own lives. A parent who caused unspeakable pain. A lover who shattered our spirit. A stranger whose violence left marks we still carry. And beneath all of it, the secret question we don't dare ask aloud. Where do those people go? And if we've ever been close to the edge ourselves, if we've ever felt the cold grip of rage, of numbness, of the desire to harm or disappear, another fear emerges. What if part of me is like them? Edgar Cayce didn't dismiss these questions. He didn't bury them under shallow positivity or spiritual cliches. Instead, he looked into the abyss and whispered back, "The soul is never lost." But sometimes it forgets itself entirely. That forgetting is what we call madness. It's not just the psychotic break or the criminal act. It's the slow soul-wounding fracture that begins in silence when a person is so hollowed out by shame, by power, by trauma, they no longer feel, no longer see others as real. The soul begins to drift. Identity crumbles, and the human becomes a shell. This is what Casey called the disintegration of consciousness. The soul fragments not from death, but from disconnection. The further we are from empathy, the further we drift from soul memory. And this is where psychology meets prophecy. Because what Casey described so long ago echoes what modern trauma science now confirms, that violence is not born in strength. It is born in disconnection. Neuroscientists have shown that chronic trauma and dissociation can suppress the parts of the brain responsible for empathy and moral judgment. What begins as a wound becomes a weapon. What begins as survival becomes cruelty. The monster, it turns out, may have once been a child, abandoned, abused, unloved, who split from their own soul to survive. But Casey's message was not one of excuse. It was one of origin. Because origin matters. If we know where the soul broke, we can begin to understand how it might heal. And this is where it becomes uncomfortable. Because if even the darkest soul was once a child, what does that mean about our own hatred? What does that mean about the vengeance we carry? It doesn't mean forgiveness comes easy. It shouldn't. But it does mean healing is possible, even for them, even for us. Somewhere perhaps in your own story, there is someone who never said sorry. Someone who vanished or blamed you or pretended nothing happened. You carry the scar, and maybe you've carried the story too. The story that says they will never change. They don't deserve peace. And maybe you're right. But Casey asked a deeper question. What if their pain isn't over? What if it's just beginning? Imagine this: a soul dies after committing horrific acts, and instead of punishment from above, it is met with the very pain it inflicted, felt from the inside out. Casey called this the mirror, the life review. And for many, it's unbearable. Some souls crack open, they weep, they surrender. Others, they cling tighter to what they were. They spiral. They become stuck. But whether they spiral or awaken, the process has begun. Now imagine this. That soul returns not as a tyrant, but as a child born into violence. Not as a leader, but as the lost one no one saves. They don't remember who they were, but the pain is familiar. It stalks them, and the soul begins to learn. Slowly, brutally, through grief. This is what Casey meant when he spoke of reincarnation as restoration, not as reward or punishment, but as reflection. Not vengeance, but balance. Some of you listening may feel this in your bones. You've wondered why your life has felt so heavy, so tangled in sorrow or shame, as if you're carrying a burden not fully your own. Some of you have felt the inexplicable guilt, the strange dreams, the pull toward healing others while being unable to save yourself. And some of you may be those returning souls, not evil, but ancient, learning. It's a terrifying thought, and yet it's a hopeful one too, because it means our pain is not wasted. Our scars are not meaningless. They are messages. Fragments of memory, echoes of soul, contracts long buried beneath the veil of forgetting. Casey often said dreams are today's answers to tomorrow's questions. And if your soul aches with questions tonight, it may be because you're already remembering. Remembering the times you caused pain. Remembering the lives you once touched for better or worse. Remembering who you truly are. Not perfect, not damned, but becoming. And maybe you've seen someone in your life who seems different, whose eyes carry shadows, who stirs fear or deep sadness you can't explain. You don't know why, but being near them feels heavy, almost otherworldly. Casey said this too. Casey said some souls still carry the energetic weight of old crimes, not as punishment, but as residue. You feel it before you see it. The air thickens around them like smoke from a memory that refuses to leave the room. Children turn away. Animals grow uneasy. Their presence unsettles as if an echo from another life lingers just beneath their skin. They try to love or fail to, but something ancient moves just behind their gaze. This is not fantasy. It is psychology, it is vibration, and it is real. So the question becomes, what do we do? How do we live knowing that evil is not punished but recycled? That trauma travels across time, that the people who hurt us might be hurt themselves, not by the world, but by karma's own design. We begin with clarity. We begin with compassion, not naive, not blind, but soul-aware. And we protect our light. Because the more whole we become, the more others, even lost souls, may find their way through us. Not by force, not by sacrifice, but by frequency. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. There is a quiet truth that lies beneath every great philosophy, every ancient teaching, and every sacred whisper passed down through time. Evil is not an origin, it is a forgetting. And to remember to truly remember is the most dangerous and divine thing a soul can do. Edgar Cayce understood this not just as prophecy, but as metaphysical law. That darkness is not the absence of light. It is light so buried, so fragmented, that it no longer knows itself. And if that is true, then even the darkest soul is still a part of us. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, called this the shadow, the part of the psyche we exile, the rage we suppress, the shame we hide, the pain we deny. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This fate, in Cayce's language, is karmic, a spiral of lessons repeated until remembered. A soul playing out old stories on new stages. The tyrant becomes the prisoner. The abuser becomes the abused. And not by some cruel cosmic punishment, but by invitation, by contract. Not because the universe is unkind, but because it is exact. Jung and Cayce, though born into different worlds, saw the same truth from opposite mirrors. One entered through dreams and trance, the other through analysis and myth. Yet both said the soul must look inward, downward into its own darkness, not to destroy it, but to integrate it. Because what we do not integrate, we project, and what we project becomes our enemy. It's why we so often find ourselves horrified by people like Hitler, not only because of the scale of destruction, but because something in us recognizes the potential for darkness. We see the shadow externalized, amplified, made monstrous, and we recoil. Not just from him, from the part of ourselves we do not want to see. But Cayce did not recoil. He faced the terrifying truth that even the vilest souls return. And not only return, they must. Why? Because even darkness longs for home. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz and founder of logotherapy, once said, "What is to give light must endure burning." He believed that the human spirit, no matter how crushed, retains freedom, the freedom to find meaning, even in suffering. Especially in suffering. Cayce's view of reincarnation echoes this. That meaning is not found in escape. It is found in return, to the scene of the pain, to the echo of the choice, to the karmic field where the seed was planted and must now be harvested. Even Hitler, yes, even he must walk back through the fire, not as ruler, but as servant, as sufferer, as witness. This is the alchemy of karma, the transformation of horror into humility. And it doesn't happen quickly. Cayce said some souls resist for centuries. They are reborn again and again, still clinging to pride, still refusing to see. And so suffering escalates, until the pain breaks the pattern. And the soul whispers, "I understand." But what does it mean to understand? It is not just intellectual. It is existential. It is the soul remembering itself as part of the whole. And this remembrance is not always peaceful. It is often catastrophic. Alan Watts, the philosopher-mystic, once described ego death as the feeling of your own being falling apart, not dying, but becoming infinite. For a soul that has known only power, control, and separation, this experience is terrifying. To feel one's illusion collapse, to be no longer a god, but a mirror. That is what awaits these souls. Not damnation, but dissolution. Not fire, but fragmentation. Some souls resist. Clinging to identity long after death, they begin to fragment. Not vanish, but scatter. Fragments acting out old scripts, blind and broken like echoes trapped in a dream that never ends. Their presence feels off. Time forgets them, but vibration remembers. They do not evolve. They repeat. Jung called this psychic inflation. The ego so swollen, so over-identified with godlike power that it collapses under its own weight. Casey called it degradation of consciousness. A soul so far removed from truth, it forgets not only what it did, but why it exists. This is not religious hell. It's existential erosion. And yet even here a spark remains. Because the soul, no matter how shattered, still holds within it the original light. Casey believed this with absolute certainty, that nothing is ever truly lost, that even in the deepest darkness, the tiniest ember waits for kindness, for pain, for remembrance. And sometimes it takes only one moment, a gesture, a prayer, a stranger's compassion, and something flickers. The mosaic begins to reform. The pain becomes a bridge. The enemy becomes a memory. This is not romanticism. It is law, the law of return. In Eastern philosophy, this is mirrored in the concept of samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, driven by ignorance, craving, and aversion. The Buddha taught that liberation does not come through avoidance, but through seeing clearly, through awareness, through walking directly into the truth of suffering and transforming it. Casey's vision of the soul echoes this, that we are not here to escape life, but to redeem it, to move through the wheel of karma until we no longer need it. So even the darkest ones, even those whose names echo through history like a wound, are not outside the law. They are inside it, trapped, turning, returning. And that is where we must begin to shift our own awareness, not to excuse, never to forget, but to understand that justice is not retribution but healing. And in that knowing, we become different. We stop casting shadows. We start integrating them. We stop demanding final answers. We start listening for deeper ones. And maybe we start to see even the monsters as lost pieces of our shared self. Because what if, as Casey suggested, we've all been on both sides? What if the soul you hate was once your kin? What if in a life long forgotten you were the one who failed, and now you've returned? Not for revenge, but for remembrance. Then justice would not be retribution. It would be healing. Spirit is the life, mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. Edgar Cayce. If you've followed this far, if the shadows haven't made you turn away, then something in you remembers. Not as knowledge, but as recognition. A whisper older than thought that says this is not just about them. This is also about me. Because the soul's journey is never isolated. It is always relational, always echoing. And Edgar Cayce's most haunting, most healing truth was this, that even the souls we fear most are part of our healing. We imagine justice as something outside us, a divine courtroom, a cosmic scale. But what if justice is lived through us? What if our own compassion, our boundaries, our prayers, our clarity are the tools through which lost souls find the way back? Not by force, but by resonance. Cayce warned of a kind of spiritual naivety of thinking that helping meant sacrificing ourselves. No. True help, he said, is light that does not burn out. It's rooted, grounded, conscious. It prays not out of pity but power, because even the soul of Hitler, shattered and spiraling, might return in a body-seeking light. And you in this life might be the one who meets that person, as a teacher, as a nurse, as a stranger who simply chooses not to return hatred for hatred. Cayce did not speak in metaphors. He spoke in memory. We are all lighthouses, and some souls, disoriented, fragmented, crying out behind invisible veils, find their way because of the frequency we hold. You don't have to change the world. You just have to carry your light. And when you pray, not for vengeance, but for understanding, you become part of the world's rebalancing. You become a bridge between this life and the next, between ego and essence, between karma and grace. Even science now confirms what mystics knew, that intention alters reality, that compassion changes brain chemistry, that forgiveness, even unspoken, can lift generational trauma. Source: National Institutes of Health, 2023, Compassion-Based Practices, and the epigenetic effects of trauma. This is not mysticism, it is spiritual physics. So the question is not, will evil be punished? The question is, will we help transform it? Because the souls we fear, the destroyers, the maniacs, the fragmented pieces of human wreckage, are not beyond hope. They are, as Casey said, souls in the process of remembering. And sometimes that process begins with a single act of light, a prayer whispered in the dark, a choice not to hate, a moment of grace when you could have judged. This is not a weakness. This is soul strength. And you may never know whose redemption began, because you chose not to close your heart. So now we return to the final truth. What if that soul is you? What if your pain, your questions, your inexplicable depth are not curses but clues? What if you too are a soul returning, not because you failed, but because you chose to remember? And if so, welcome back. Welcome back to the path. Welcome back to your soul contract. Welcome back to the light that never forgot you. Because in the end, even the most terrifying soul will return to the source. Not all at once, not easily, but inevitably. And maybe, just maybe, your light is the very one that helps them find the way. Sometimes hearing the right words at the right time is how we realign with our soul. If this felt like one of those moments, share it with someone else who's ready to remember. What if you're not broken? What if you're simply remembering your soul contract?